Do you write tests for your code? If not, it's time to learn how, and also learn why you should. Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we will learn about JavaScript Unit Tests and the Jest testing framework, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. The goal of today's lesson is to introduce testing to beginners who likely haven't been writing tests for their code and aren't exactly sure why they should. When you build an application, you probably check to see if everything works. You're doing all of this manually. If you write tests for your code, there are definitely some benefits. The process of writing tests may help you catch bugs that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. You'll also be able to save time by simply running the tests instead of doing all the manual checks every time you add new features to your code to see if you broke anything else. You'll also be able to confidently say you've tested your code, and that confidence can go a long ways, especially if you're working on a team with other devs. And then your tests are also documentation that the team can use if they're running your code instead of you just saying, "Trust me, bro." And just a quick note that I'm just going to be using JavaScript for this introduction to Jest, and that will eliminate any other prerequisites like knowing TypeScript or React. I know some viewers are going to want a video on testing with things like TypeScript, Vite, React, or even Next.js, and I will do those in the future. You do need to have Node.js installed so we can use npm. That said, you don't need to know Node.js for this tutorial. We'll just be writing JavaScript, not specifically Node.js. But if you don't have Node.js installed, get the LTS version here, which stands for long-term support, download it and install it to your computer now, and then resume the tutorial. I'm in VS Code, and I've created a folder for this tutorial called Jest Intro, and I suggest you create a folder as well to follow along and have VS Code open. With that said, you can open up a terminal window with Control and the backtick, and once you have Node installed, you can check the version just to verify it's installed by typing node, then -v, and I've got version 18.15 right now. I think I saw the LTS version on the website was 18.17, so just a little bit newer. I need to update mine, but it won't make any difference today. Let's create a new file in our file tree, and I'm just going to call this sum.js, and we're going to write a sum function. So I'll say function sum receives two params, A and B, and then inside we'll just return the sum of those two params, so A and B. That should do what we expect it to, but we haven't tested it yet. And we also need to export this function, and for the testing with Jest, we need to say module.exports, then set that equal to sum, and then go ahead and Control S to save our file. So how do we test our sum function? Well, we need to install Jest, and to do that, we're going to need to initialize npm first. So let's press Control and the backtick once again to open up a terminal window, type npm init, then -y will just answer yes to the series of questions it usually asks so we can get started just a little faster. And now it's created a package JSON file. So I'll click on that and close the terminal, and here we can see our package JSON. Now we currently have no dependencies whatsoever, so we need to install Jest for our project as well. So I'll Control backtick once again to open my terminal, and then I'm going to type npm I for install, and then Jest, but we want this to be a dev dependency, so we can say dash and the capital D, which will make this a dependency that we use only in development because that's the only time we run tests. Okay, let's close the terminal and take another look at our package JSON, and now under dev dependencies, we see Jest. Now Jest is a very popular testing framework that is maintained by Meta, originally developed by Facebook, and of course they've changed their name to Meta now. And now we're ready to test our sum function with Jest. So to do this, we need to create a new file, and we'll name this sum.test.js. Now in this file, we need to start by importing our sum function. So we'll say const sum equals require, which you may or may not have seen before. This is a common JS import. Then we'll put quotes and say ./sum. That's where our file is located. After that, let's go ahead and create our testing function, and it starts with test. Then let's put in a description, and here we'll just say this adds 1 plus 2 to equal 3. Very simple description. Now we put a comma. Now we'll put the function that runs the test. So this is just an anonymous arrow function. And inside of this, we'll use the word expect. So we expect, not expect all declaration, just expect. That autocomplete is wanting to help me a little too much there. So expect, and then inside of parentheses, we'll call the sum function. We'll pass in 1 and 2 as the two params. And after that, we can say dot to be. So we expect the sum of 1 and 2 to be 3. Now that is our test. So how do we run our test? Well, we need to go back to the package JSON, and notice here there is a scripts area in the package JSON file and it says test. Let's delete what's inside of there, and instead we'll replace it with Jest and save the file. Now that we've defined our test script, we can go ahead and open the terminal once again. Now we can just say npm test and press enter, and it should run Jest, which will run our test, and we'll get a report here. It will tell us how long it takes. It takes just a few seconds to do it, but it shouldn't take too long. And now we have our results. You can see we passed our test where it adds 1 plus 2 to equal 3, and it took 2 milliseconds to run the test. It just had to start up Jest a little bit there as well. So we have one test suite, and we have one pass test as well. And the total, of course, it says it took to run everything was about 2 seconds once Jest was up and running. So I'll close the terminal, close package JSON. Now we look at this test once again. This is a unit test. And what a unit test does, it tests the smallest unit in isolation. So we just have a function that does one thing. Now that's a clean code principle. Your function should only do one thing. So this will also help you break down larger problems into smaller ones, which helps with problem solving overall. So we have our function. It does one thing. It just adds the two numbers, and we can easily test that in a unit test. Now let's create another function. So inside the file tree, let's create another file, and we'll call this is palindrome. And palindrome is spelled palindrome.js. There we go. And I used camel case there, so we have a capital P. So I'll say function is palindrome. And now this will receive a word as a param, and we'll check to see if it's a palindrome. A palindrome is the same forwards as it is backwards. So if you took the word taco cat, that is a palindrome. So in this case, we'll just return the word, and we'll check with the strict equals. You know what? I want to make this 2 lowercase as well. So the original word 2 lowercase, so the caps won't matter. Now we'll check with a strict equals against the word. Once again, 2 lowercase, but we need to reverse it, and this is reversing a string to make sure it's exactly the same forward and backwards. So then we can split it into an array, and after we split to an array, we can reverse the array, and after we reverse the array, we can join the array, again just on an empty string, and then we can replace all, and then we'll replace all of the commas that are created by doing that, and we'll replace them with just an empty space again, and I'll use single quotes to be consistent. Let me Alt-Z so this wraps down. Now, somebody here may know a more efficient way to do this, but this is what came to mind for me to reverse a string and check it against the other direction of the string, the original direction. So what we talked about before, where a function should only do one thing, I'm really doing 2 things here, and we'll come back to that. But I just want to write this function in this style first, and we'll save this. And remember then, we also need to say module.exports equals is palindrome, so we can export this and then test the function. Now to test this function, let's follow that same pattern and create a new file. So we'll say is palindrome.test.js, and inside of here we'll say const is palindrome is equal to require, and then we'll import is palindrome, and after that we'll go ahead and write a test. So I'll say test, and I'm going to say taco cat returns true, because this is going to be true or false. We're just testing to see, is it a palindrome or is it not? So now our anonymous function, which is an arrow function, It's going to say expect. Now, I wonder why I'm getting that autocomplete. I certainly don't like it, but I want expect, then is palindrome. And inside of this, I'm going to pass taco cat with a capital T as well. Now, after that, I'm going to say to be, and I'm just making sure this is true. Now we can save this and run the test, and then we'll think a little bit more about our function and our tests. So once again, I can run npm test, and we'll see what results we get. And we have our results. We have 2 test suites now, as we have 2 test files, and we ran 2 tests. And so both of the test suites completed, and we passed all of the tests. So have we really tested our function the way we should to its fullest? We only checked to see if it would return true. It could also, or should also, return false when we pass in a word that is not a palindrome. So to do this, I'm going to highlight lines 3 through 5, use Shift Alt and the down arrow to copy the test down. And now I'm going to switch a couple of things. I'll just say Dave returns false. Now let's pass in the word Dave, and we expect the result to be false. So now we're running 2 tests inside of the same test suite. Let's go ahead and open the terminal, run our tests again, and see our output. And here in our report, you can see we have 2 test suites, but we ran 3 tests now, and everything passed once again. But I wanted you to see the difference that now there's only 2 test suites, but we ran more tests than we had test suites, or files, if you will, because we put 2 tests inside of the is palindrome test suite. So we checked for a false response as well as a true response. Now we're going to come back to the isPalindrome function. As I mentioned, I want to talk just a little bit more about why I think it's doing 2 things and a little bit of clean code here. But let's create one more function first, another new file, and we'll call this shallow object. We'll abbreviate object and then say clone.js. Now I do have a video on deep clones or deep copies versus shallow copies and all the details that go into that. So you may want to check that out on my YouTube channel. But for this, we just want to create a shallow copy of an object that is passed into the function. So we'll just say function, and then we'll say shallow object clone. And now we'll pass in an object for param. Then we'll return a new object, and we'll just spread in the old one. So that creates a shallow object clone when you do that. Then we can just once again say module.exports equals shallow object clone. Now let's create a new file, and we'll call this shallow object clone.test.js. So notice the pattern there, because of course Jest will run all of the files that have the .test.js pattern in them that we've left here. We haven't had to specify any file, you've noticed, as we've done that. Okay, let's import shallow object clone. We do that by saying equals require, and then we just say where the function is, and it is inside of our shallow object clone file. After that, we need to say test, and we want this to create a clone of the object parameter. Now for our function, which is an arrow function once again, we need to have an object to clone. So first we'll just define my object here, set this equal to an object that has a person key, and we'll call this person a hitchhiker. And then after that, we'll also say number, and we'll give this number 42. Maybe this person has a towel, and maybe you get that reference, and maybe you don't. Okay, we've got expect, and now once again it wanted to switch that, so expect, and inside of the expect I'm going to call shallow object clone, and then it needs to receive my object, and then we're going to say, let's get it wrong just on purpose. Let's say to be like we were before, and now let's go ahead and pass in my object once again, just so you can see a failed message before we go ahead and fix this. So I've saved our test. Let's open up the terminal and run npm test once again, and let's check the output. Well, now our output looks a little different. Out of our test suites, 1 failed and 2 passed. Out of our tests, 1 failed and 3 passed. And if we scroll up, we can get some more details here. It's telling us that to be was not the right choice. So if we scroll up, it's going to give us some more help here. It says we failed our shallow object clone test suite, and it says create a clone of the object parameter, which is the description we gave it. Expect received to be expected. Here it says the object.is equality. So if it should pass with deep equality, replace to be with 2 strict equals. Now, we won't get into everything about deep and shallow equality, but here we could use just 2 equals or 2 strict equals. And I typically like to use strict. So let's switch this. And now we'll want 2 strict equals. Save the file, and let's rerun our tests once again. I will scroll back down, run npm test, and now let's wait for those results. Everything looks much better. We have 3 passed test suites out of 3 total. We have 4 passed tests out of 4 total. That's great. So how do we know what to use as far as to be or 2 strict equals? Well, there's lots of choices. Let's quickly look at the docs for Jest. Back on the Jest web page, we can click Docs at the top. From there, there's the Getting Started page, there's Using Matchers, and there's more resources. I'm just going to click More Resources right away. We'll scroll down, it says we can look at the full API reference. Once we're at the API reference, which apparently is the API link up here at the top beside Docs, if we click that, yep, it's the same thing. Then we can go to Expect. And this is where we're going to get all of the different choices that we might be able to use under matchers here. So here we see to be, which is probably the most used one. There are many other choices here. So I'm just going to scroll down to where we had strict equals, I believe. So let me see if I can find that again. I went by 2. There we go, right there, 2 strict equals. You can click on any one of these for a description. So as you're writing your tests and figuring out what you want to test, you'll probably reference back to this list a lot. I know I do that when I'm writing tests with this framework or with other libraries as well. It's always good to reference the different possibilities that you can test for. Okay, we're back in VS Code and I'm ready to address the isPalindrome function where I said it's really doing 2 things. Well, really, we want it to just compare the word in its original form, 2 lowercase is fine, but then reversed, of course. But here, not only are we comparing, we're also reversing the word. So maybe we want to create a separate function that would be called like reverse string, and then we could call that function as well, which would allow us to test to see, is this actually working? Is this the reason maybe our isPalindrome function isn't working? Not that it can't compare, but we're not properly reversing the word. So that's how I would break that down into smaller problems. So let's go ahead and copy this. And now over here in the file tree, let's create a new file called reversestring.js. And now we'll create a function that's called reverse string. Or we could have called it reverse word. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and pass in a string, I guess. Let's switch it to word here. And I'll keep the reverse string function name at least because I've already named those. Now here, I'm just going to return and pass in what I was doing, Alt-Z to wrap that down, but pass in what I was doing to reverse the word. So now we're returning it. So we can write a test for this. Of course, we have to have module.exports equals reverse string as well. And now that we have saved that, we can write a test for reverse string. So a new file, and we'll say reverse string.test.js. Now we need to import our reverse string. There it is. Set this equal to require, and we'll get it from /./ there it is, reverse string. Now that we've done that, we'll start off with test once again, and we need to describe what we're doing. So we will just reverse any given string. Now this will be a function. And inside of the function, we're going to call reverse string inside of the expect every time here. So I need to say expect space and go back just to avoid that. Now we will expect reverse string to reverse any string we pass it. So now I could just pass Dave. Now we will expect this to be, now we need to say the reverse of Dave. Let's open up the terminal and run npm test to see if our reverse string test passes as well. And it failed, and I can see why it failed, because we received all lowercase back, and aren't we doing that in our function as well? It doesn't just set everything to lowercase in the function. Let's find it here. It also calls to lowercase, but maybe we don't want to do that. That's not specific to reversing a string. So let's remove the to lowercase here, and we could call it back in our other function when we need to. So let's save this, once again run our tests and see if they pass with npm test. And now all tests have passed. So maybe we want to use one function as a helper with the other, but we want to test those individually. And that's essentially what we did here with our reverse string function, and of course the test for reverse string. So now let's go back to isPalindrome and put that together as well. So we're going to need to import the other function at the top. So we'll say const reverse string up here, set this equal to our require, and we can bring in our reverse string function. Once we've done that, we can then call it right here. So we'll call reverse string. We'll pass in the same word, and then remember we need to add the to lowercase. So we just decided to do that to both the word and the reverse string here. Now that helps us compare, because a word might have a capital at the beginning, like a formal name like Dave, but then when we compare those, we might not have a capital in the one we're comparing. So it's good to just set everything to lowercase. So now that we've made those changes, let's run the tests again. And everything passed in our 4 test suites and the 5 tests we ran. So I really feel like breaking that isPalindrome down to a separate function that reversed the string was the right thing to do to get the accurate unit test, because if we weren't reversing that string properly, it could have been causing our isPalindrome test to fail without actually being the reason it was failing. The reason was we were not reversing the string properly, so we can't assume that either. Now, how do we know we've tested all of our code? Well, we can go back into the package JSON, and when we call Jest, we can add the coverage flag, which is 2 dashes and then the word coverage. And if we save that, then it's going to give us a full report to say if we have tested all of our code. So let's, of course, run our tests once again with that coverage flag and check out the output that will be a little more detailed than what we received before. And now we're getting a full table here in the terminal with our output. So not only the report at the bottom about the passed or failed tests, we also have a full table here that says we are getting 100% coverage in everything we have, essentially. So there's nothing we're missing. So let's go ahead and see how it looks when we do miss something. And I'm just going to open up that isPalindrome file once again, and I could put in a hello world function or something like that that we're not using. So I could just say function hello, and here we're just going to return a string that says hello. That's fine. Now, if we do that, and then we go ahead and run our tests one more time, we should see that we are not getting 100% coverage because this function is not being called, it's not being tested, there's nothing going on with the hello function, it's just sitting there and it's unused. And now we can see in our output it's a little bit different. So we did not get full coverage of the statements in the isPalindrome.js file. We have 75%. Only 50% of the functions, because there's 2 functions and one is not being tested, and then only 75% of the lines. How many lines of code are uncovered by tests? 4 lines. So that's a very detailed report. And if we look back at our file, we can see that, well, the function is really only 3 lines of code here, but it gave us a 4 probably because we added 1 more when we added it. But overall, this is not covered, and I just wanted you to see how that would show up in the report as well. And remember, to get all of those extra details, you need to add the coverage flag to your Jest call inside of your scripts. So we've covered unit tests today, which is a great place to start when you're learning about testing. But there's also integration tests and end-to-end tests, or you'll see them referred to as E2E tests. And I plan to cover all of that in the future. In addition, Jest, as you see here on their webpage, is just one testing framework. There are other popular options as well that I hope to explore with you in the future. And as mentioned at the beginning of the video, I do plan to cover testing with TypeScript, Vite, React, Next.js, all in future videos. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.